Welcome to the Analytics Excellence Webinar Series, sponsored by Black Hills IP and the SLW Institute. Today's topic will be Patent Landscaping Analytics and Comparative Patent Owner Analytics, presented by Mark Stignani. Mark?
Thank you very much. I am happy to be here. For those listening, I'm looking at our list of people attending today here, and we've got really an eclectic mix of folk here. So we've got U.S. and International Counsel, we have a number of commercial information vendors, a mixture of legal and non-legal clients, old clients and old friends and new friends. But I will be very happy to stop and explain any detail that is unfamiliar to you if it's not part of your patent practice or your IP practice. I'm going to try to temper this as broadly as I can with as many people get the most benefit as possible. So again, thank you for attending. I'm honored to be speaking here on behalf of the Institute. A little bit about me: I'm practice chair for analytics here at Schwegman. I was former AGC over at Thomson Reuters. I do practice most forms of IP. I also have a sales and marketing background that I picked up over the years as well. So what I specialize in is IP forensics, if you will, or the merger of kind of business and IP analytics that will help my business clients both kind of understand in lay terms what an IP portfolio might represent, as well as precision and precise review of the actual legal side of the IP as well. So please, as you're going through this, feel free to use the question chat thing to throw questions in there. Giles, who's managing this thing, would be please feel free to interject with questions if they're pertinent for the what I'm speaking about. Just kind of general housekeeping stuff there. So with much less ado than that, let's move forward into the presentation here. Have you seen that? Okay. So really what I'm talking about here today, we have 30 minutes of content here. And I'm going to reserve 15 minutes for questions and answers, should it be interesting enough to you. Otherwise, I'll give you the rest of the day back. I'm really talking about what's interesting in competitive ISP landscaping, or what sort of forensic inferences can you get out of this. And that'll be the bulk of the presentation. I'll talk a little bit about tools and data, and I'll talk about red herrings, just kind of as a close before we get to questions. So hopefully we'll see people raising their hands as they go through this to explain anything further. I don't mind it. It's a great way to walk through and get dialogue going on in the presentation. So thanks, and here we go. So what's a forensic inference at first? It's a made-up word that I made up. It covers an IP trend in comparative company data that is often true. And I say it is often true because it's not always true, and you cannot and should not just rely wholly upon a statistical analysis once you find something that you suspect is a forensic inference. So I tend to find lots of interesting statistical data. I do this probably hundreds of times a year across many, many industries. So I can find inferences based upon quirks in the data, general business practices of the companies that are performing that. But I always go out and try to look for supporting evidence to support the statistical or the forensic inference that I can get out of the patent data or the trademark data, whatever data I'm looking at. So I want to caveat what I'm saying here. So I'm going to try to do is present a series of forensic inferences that I make, and then I go look for support for as I'm doing comparative searches and comparative analysis of various companies' IP portfolios. So how do we use these things? So what we do in company landscaping is I do, most of my work is in these kind of 6 categories. And frankly, to talk about how to do each and every one of these things, it's about an hour of discussion for each of these bullet points. So one of the things here is this is the last in this series of analytic webinars. So we'll leave you on kind of a cliffhanger. Please let your host know whether or not you'd like to hear more on any of these things, because there's quite a bit of content. There's quite a bit of actual technique that needs to go into describing how one does these sorts of things and how one actually goes about it. So please let Giles know what you think, and we'll make new content accordingly as we go to that. So really what we're doing, what are the uses of company landscaping? A lot of it's simply competitive intelligence. You're talking about active or reactive or passive analysis of what your competitors are doing in line with what you're doing. You can use this to help justify new benefits for new product development for your own firm, your own company. You can do lots and lots of different things with patent data, because it's one of the few areas that is essentially hard to set false positives into. So patent filings, because of their expense, because of their requirement for disclosure, tend to be less hype than a marketing document. They tend to be less puffing than other forms of documents. They tend to be more specific because you do have kind of a 112 issue or a duty to disclose how to make it. So one of the things that patents have over almost any other competitive intelligence document out there is that there's an aspect of truth to it. So we use this by looking at filings, litigations, assignments, almost anything else that is transferable and publicly registered around patent documents. We use tagging and semantic analysis to overlay patents along product lines of competitors. We look at lots and lots of acquisitions of disposables as far as assets themselves, companies themselves, looking hard and soft IP in this sort of landscaping world as well. We try to discover what the syllogisms are, given a number of different forensic inferences. We try to estimate IP budgets. We do this on a fairly regular basis for clients as to what their competitors are spending. It helps them do their budgeting going forward. We can estimate company health. So if you look at a number of companies and you start seeing either a step function abandonment or some massive change in how they're treating their portfolio, or if they're selling their portfolio, there's indicators as far as health goes. We also can help companies identify the companies that are using IP tax planning. So I can talk more upon that once we get to the slide, but in this essence, it's using owning IP in low tax jurisdictions and using it, as a tool to move monetary instruments around to help them receive their income in the right tax jurisdiction, so to speak. So a lot of this is, we use this for kind of debuffing the hype that a lot of people talk around their projects. So we look at different things where you'll see something in the news and we go try to find what is the patent described around that, and we can certainly react for our clientele and tell them, well, the marketing hype says this, and we're going to debuff that, though is technically actually covered, and this is not much or much ado about nothing. So we try to get that type of point across in our client report outs as well. So let's dive on in. So, whoops, let's back up here. So extracting patent strategies. So for instance, inference number one is that organic patenting generally demonstrates a long-term strategy. And it really tries to focus on the organic growth of and the strengths of the company itself. And for instance, inference number two is acquired patents are generally short-term or growth actions, or in some cases, gap actions. So what we try to do is when we break up a patent portfolio apart, we look at what's organic, what has been the meat and potatoes of the company, what is brought in, and when they do acquire patents, we try to overlay those on top of the portfolio that they've got organically and try to make some determination about what, if any, strategy is there. Now, what do I mean by each of these things? What I'm really trying to say is you can reverse engineer, an apparent patent strategy. It may not be right because I have found in many cases that there is a lack of strategy in many cases to the portfolios of a number of companies. So one of the things that we're trying to do is highlight what seems logical, what is syllogistically interesting that we say, well, because of this, because there's apparent intent in the growth strategy or developed product strategy. And so how do we get there? So we take a number of actions. I gave the top 5 actions here. And I'll talk a little bit about those. We tend to map organic portfolios against the products they have. And then we'd also do the same thing with acquired products in the acquired portfolio. And then from the date forward from there, where we start to see crossover from an acquired portfolio in a continuation program, we start to look for where those may actually be reaching out to cover the organic portfolio or a gap in the organic portfolio. We look at organic inventor actions, growth of new inventors, or departures of long-term inventors. We look for relocation of those to new ventures or other competitors. Now, this is important because a lot of the brain power of companies sometimes is collapsed around a really distinct number of prolific inventors who don't seem to stick around very long. They do a lot of serial inventing, and they move on to another company. And, they move on, and so there's kind of an overlay of whether an inventor has been with a company for a period of time and kind of the growth strategy of that particular inventor's work, because that is a strong indicator of where growth is going by looking at the inventors themselves. We overlay the acquired patents, and from there we try to figure out where are the gaps, because in many cases, when you're going through an early patenting of a new product line, you miss stuff. You miss a fair amount of interesting bits, or you filed your patents early enough so that you didn't actually guess what was important by the time you got it to marketplace. So a lot of times we look at acquired products for where the perceived gaps would be of the company. So we can say that if company X buys a product line from company Y that is in the business of getting rid of portfolios, say for instance like IBM or some of the other more prolific patent licensing organizations out there, you have the opportunity to say there is a perceived gap, at least by the management and by the team there, that is obviously a gap that they perceive. So you can look for much more intelligence around that by itself, just on the acquired patents alone. We cross-reference a lot with litigation, because sometimes acquisitions are offensive or defensive or counter-offensive when you have a litigation and IPR. You may pay a great deal more for a patent when you've got litigation engaged. So we try to overlay that and put that in perspective. We also tend to look at marketing documents, news releases, SEC statements about or to the portfolios themselves. And we look for all of those things. And when I say litigation, I want to make sure everyone understands I'm talking about litigation, IPR, ITC actions, anything that is enforcement-based. I'll make sure I've covered that. But what we can do there is when we overlay these multiple inferences, we get the syllogistic benefit of having a number of things pointing in the same direction. And we try to get to that point with the organization that we're doing the analytics for, to give them a fairly decent storyline. And I've got a couple questions here, just so I'll answer them as they're there. FI is a forensic inference, and I've got a definition of that earlier in the first slides. And then what are the data sources for assignments to extract patent strategies from? We use all the official sources for our data assignments. So we get our information directly from the USPTO, and we get things directly from the other patent entities, patenting state entities or national entities themselves. So I'll just keep answering questions as they go. So thank you for asking the questions. We'll keep streaming that. So let's talk about product lines. So there's a lot of forensic inferences here around products. So one of the things that most companies don't do well is have a good idea of what products and which patents are related. Now, there are some litigation issues around that, and I understand wholly and completely why people don't tie things one-to-one together. But in general, when I'm doing forensic analysis of somebody else's portfolio, I find it relatively straightforward to chart what patents affect which products. And sometimes they give me a nice advantage by actually listing the patents that would cover this product line. You'd be surprised how many companies out there that do not. So let's just go down this list here, and then I will talk about it more holistically as we go. So in general, original patents chart a general strategic development. Continuations, which is a unique thing in the US patent system, or a divisional, as my friends in Europe would generally look at, generally do not chart a strategic development. They are generally a smaller and less important aspect of that. Patents by themselves and their claims, to me, are most easily characterized by a Mandelbrot model in the mathematics world, where your first land grab or your first set of claims, should attempt to claim as much as possible, because each and subsequent following claim that you can make in this area, unless you're very, very intuitive and very good at guessing what the next 5 to 10 years is going to look like in your product development stage, are smaller and try to protect niche things. So when I say continuations and divisionals generally do not chart a strategic development, they generally chart a niche or a tactical development. Forensic inference 1B, foreign filings generally chart a product reach. Now, what do I mean by that? It costs a lot to cover your product in a number of marketplaces. So that, the extent of the foreign filings indicates at least a couple of things. It indicates where the client or the patent filer believes that they have both appetite for enforcement or some other reason that would allow them to do business in that country for having that patent there. Or they are using those marketplaces as well as to move royalties and literature through transfer pricing for tax planning purposes. So I tend to look at how far you file, or how far a client or a target would file their patents, to kind of indicate where they think about their patents go. Generally, forensic inference 2, subsequent product patents are generally incremental improvements. They're generally not widely different from the earlier patents, and they also tend not to really break new ground. They tend to be smaller and smaller and smaller, using my Mandelbrot model as a model for how patent claiming works. Acquired patents, they tend to be, as I said earlier, gap fillers or litigation response, or something that they didn't get to with the original one. So if you're going and buying, you see someone goes and buys a number of patents in an area related to a product line that are earlier in time than their first patent, in general, there's probably a really good reason. It might be litigation, go look there. It might be an assertion. It could be an IPR, but it could be a patent so they don't feel they're comfortable having the portfolio they have without getting these earlier ones in place. Again, continuation individuals of those acquired patents, though, is probably much, much more interesting as to how they are blending that into their existing product line, assuming that they're acquiring these for the basis of keeping their patents going forward. Move on to the next line here, acquisitions and disposal. Now, this is an area that analytics is really, really useful, and you can get some good stuff really quickly. I have a couple of subsequent slides on this as well. We can compare, anybody can compare, a lot of your commercial systems can compare portfolio X and portfolio Y, and they generally carry CPC or IPC classification codes to go with it. So I think those are good first indicators of synergy. When I'm looking at an acquisition or disposal, or somebody trying to make an argument to somebody how a patent portfolio fits together or doesn't fit together, this forensic inference number 1, number 2 are really, really good places to start if you need something quickly. And I'll flip back and forth here because I pulled slides together in kind of the Covidian-Medtronic merger here. And so you can see two things here in these next two slides. And I'll go back to those slides and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the aspects that I'm speaking of there. But you can see very quickly how Covidian and Medtronic merge, especially in this area where they've got the most patents. So this is, they've got both huge portfolios, but this specific class of surgical here kind of shows how the Covidian is really surging before the acquisition. And then if we start to look at class by class on the comparison, we can see very, very quickly as we're talking about these forensic inferences here. So you can see the class A61B, there was parity to a large degree, they both were doing a lot of filings. There was a potential overlap. There's very little, I think, room for massive new innovation or massive new benefit by the first class. But if you look at, say, for instance, the class A61H, it was non-competitive, not a good reason to buy the matters. But we can kind of just eyeball these things as they get on and look for various inferences that we would, that I would at least start with when I'm advising a client whether to keep or cover or get rid of a set of patents that a target is suggested to them. So I'll come back to a little more of this later, but what I wanted to do here is say that you can see how easy that is to kind of quickly see areas of parity, areas of synergy. Complementary assets are harder. That's, I want to say that you can chart those, but you have to understand one really important thing about an acquisition or disposal is how it fits, is that what is the strategy of your client? Because the business strategy of client is much more useful to understand what assets are complementary versus simply the top class comparison that I just showed you here. Overlapping filings are not necessarily duplicative as well, because one of the things that is important here is you can go down another level in class comparison, and they're helpful. But if you're really going to go into this and try to figure out what to keep and what to get rid of, you have to actually get down into the claim language itself, and does it really cover what you want to cover in the market that covers, and make your determination of that. So that's why we get to forensic inference number 4. Product mapping is really, really, really imperative when you're doing acquisition and disposal work to identify status of how it fits. You've got to map it, whether it's process, it's product, or composition, and whether it's complementary. And this is where you need to have the business person reacting to what you're coming up with from a patenting standpoint. So anyway, we'll just, I'm trying to stay on schedule here, so I won't go too much past the 30 minutes here, but I want everybody to ask questions as you see the need to. So, all right. So, quick ways of doing that. IP budget estimates. This is another thing I get a fair amount of the time from when I'm doing competitive reviews of another patent portfolio in a marketplace of another operating client. What we try to do here is we are trying to estimate what and justify what the budget of our client is as they go through it in their annual planning. So we're asked quite a bit to, well, what does this competitor A figure they do in filing? What do they do for B? Just kind of give us an estimate of cost. So we look at 3 different items. We look at year-on-year filings, which is readily available. We can estimate based upon the size of the law firm that they're using, or whether they're using in-house counsel to prepare. We look at the reputation of the law firms, because some law firms charge more based upon reputation. We look at the pair data to estimate what are the prosecution costs, because a lot of times we'll make an estimate for an initial filing, but we look at the average number of office actions and average number of RCs, and you can see that other law firms are spending a great deal more time in office action, and so ultimately the financial budget may be very different based upon the way that they're presenting themselves in the pair data. So we tend to do a lot of this work for clients who are, right around budget season to help them kind of guess, well, by comparison, my company is spending X in its budget, company Y is spending X in their budget. And we use a lot of supporting indicators in that respect. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn looking at who's interacting with which company to make sure that I understand clearly which law firm is prepping the work, because a lot of times this type of stuff will be masked. Now let's move on. Company health. 3 very core things. I mean, these are pretty logical inferences. Distressed companies cut or abandon IP filings. Literally, it's one of the first things they get rid of. So if you see a step function in abandonment, a step function in licensing management. So as you can see here, here's another company I reviewed and looked at their abandonment matters. And right when they had some fiscal difficulty, They literally, you can chart when they got better and when they got worse with respect to the number of matters they abandoned over that period of time. It cuts pretty quickly. Number two, distressed companies stop paying annuities. They will actually get rid of internationally first, non-U.S. matters first is what I generally see. And there's always exceptions. Again, I try to say these things that, but if I'm looking for, what companies are distressed, I look for things that are just rapidly abandoned or have stopped paying annuities on a regular basis. This data is all available. A lot of commercial vendors do provide this now. And it's very useful for seeing what people are getting rid of, because then you have a pretty good idea of what they're not interested in anymore by this abandonment. Number three, they abruptly sell or license core IP. I'll give Yahoo is very famous for selling lots of its IP to different people over the last few years. Sears just sold off their Craftsman line. There's a very good examples of a company distressed. This tends to be after they've cut abandoned IP filings and stopped paying annuities, but it's a logical progression. Now, as I mentioned there's exceptions. Sometimes we see licensing core IP going different places, and I'll talk about that in the next slide around tax planning. But when a business exits a core business, it can sell off its IP or donate its IP. I should say a business area, not a business exiting a business. So again, there's always exception to this. This is why I really, really want to, hammer around forensic evidence that makes you useful and makes things interesting for you to go after. Okay, finally, and then we'll close out here in the next couple of minutes. We look to identify companies that are using IP tax planning. So the inferences here is a company that does a lot of self-assignment. So you've got entities, for instance, Sony does this a fair amount. Sony has reassigned recently a number of its matters to a core entity in Las Vegas, where there's a superior tax treatment to IP assets in that state. We tend to look a lot at companies that transfer and assign to LLCs or entities that are in Ireland, Switzerland, Singapore, or Bermuda. Another good indicator of tax planning. We also look at assignments when a matter is purchased from another company. It doesn't go to the core company, the main company. It'll go to an LLC operating entity. I mean, most of the large patent companies out there have LLC or LLP entities that they do transfer assignments and acquisitions. So a lot of times when we're doing this type of backwards analysis and see who's tax planning with their patents, we look for these entities coming out. All right, well, quickly on the tools. We use the Inaqua Claim IP. We use Clarivate's soon-to-be X Thompson Innovation tool. We use Patent Buddy, and we use Read tools. I will say we use companies that really focus on having good data. There's a number of providers out there that really focus on graphics, and I've never found their data to be good. So pretty graphics are useless, at least in my advice, unless you have gone through and inspect the data. Now we use a number of proprietary tools as well here that we developed at the law firm, because we're kind of weird that way. So we use a lot of semantic extraction to help us get places faster. We pivot around specs, we pivot around claims, we pivot around inventors. We do a lot of pivoting around companies. Now, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, because none of the commercial vendors do a great job on this, is that we go out and look for what a company actually owns, because it's really, the assignment data themselves at a lot of the places do not actively catch up in real time. So we actually have to look at people who are acquired and go out and look at all their pre-existing entities and try to bring together what the actual company portfolio looks like if you're not doing that. So we spend a lot of time doing data validation. If you don't have good data, you don't have good answers. So a lot of times we will run the same query on a number of commercial tools and compare the results just to make sure we have belt and suspenders there our answers. The red herrings. Do not trust pure statistical analysis, ever. I can't emphasize that enough, because It has been wrong so many times in my analysis. There's been some intervening reason in my looking at the supporting evidence. There's been a rogue inventor. There's been a purpose. There was something in the acquisition document that required they do X, Y, and Z. There's lots of things that are intrinsically missing. So you have to look at extrinsic evidence and just make sure that there's logic involved in why you do something. I find IP holding companies are harder to work with. You have to go through and actually hand categorize the patents based upon products, because IP holding companies can be very much obscuring what the corporate or actual intent of the companies are. Distrust social media statements about your these portfolios as well. So I don't tend to put much basis in things people say, about a product on Twitter or LinkedIn or things there. But I do use LinkedIn extensively to figure out the people and the operators around a portfolio so that I can, assess their activities as well. So there's a lot of things here that can lead you astray, and that's why I say human review is really important, and make sure you've got great data. So I'm past my 30 minutes here, but let's move into discussion and questions. I think that, please start throwing questions out there. If there's no questions, you can, have a great day. But I've got a question here talking about how we use Mandelbrot modeling to think about claim language. So I use the Mandelbrot model to talk about claim language because if you don't think about the broadest possible claims that you could be asking for, at least in how you describe it in your first specification, you do set yourself up for getting that piece of art used against you in any subsequent patent that you're putting forward. So I tend to make the discussion with a client as we're looking for a claim basis. We do a lot of claim basis analysis as we're going through prosecution here, simply because a lot of times people will cut their nose off to spite their face to get an issuance. So we use the Mandelbrot model to think about how we don't put limitations in our first set of claim language, but we also have to limit it based on what's in the prior art. So hopefully, and I'm happy to talk about that one offline, and we can talk about there. I'm going to make the slides. The slides will be available as well as this presentation in my illustrious words. So what commercial databases provide fields related to the number of office actions? That I can think of two off the top of my head. Patent Buddy certainly does, and that's the one I tend to use. I think there's a Reed product out there that Chris Holt put together. I think they bought it. I forget when they bought it, but it's called Patent Advisor. They do have office action figures there. There are a number of products coming forward on this in the future here. If any of you will have a question, you want to call me directly, call my phone number. I'm on the SLWIP website. You should be able to find me, or I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to talk about this. I have lots of opinions on commercial databases. Another question here. From my portfolio, do you have a sense whether or not one can reasonably talk about an average percentage or common percentage of patents that are abandoned during their lifespan? I have to say that is, it's a relatively high percentage. I mean, it depends though on the type of consumer of the patents. So IBM is a great example of rapid abandonment. They get rid of their patents fast. You get through the first third of their life, you get to the first maintenance fee payments, they tend to get rid of a lot of things if they're not making money on it. They file so many, they don't have to look backwards. So I spend a lot of time looking at that, and a lot of companies will set an average of 10 to 20% of abandonment just because they're not getting what they want in the portfolio. So I spend a lot of time advising clients that say, well, you're stuck on this portfolio, you're stuck on this patent matter, you're at your 6th office action, your 2nd RC. Might it be better to take the money you're going to spend on arguing this through a 3rd RC and take it forward and either file a continuation that's more meaningful that we can show using statistical methodology to the examiner that it's a clear area. How much may it cost for a landscape? Gosh, it's a very hard question to answer because landscapes are defined literally by the questions that the business person is trying to answer. So if it's just something, you know, tell me what the market for vacuum cleaners is. I mean, there's tons of people out there that can do that sort of stuff. What we specialize in landscaping is the next level up from there. Is that here are the interesting patents in a landscape for you, and those you know generally run around $1,000 to start point, and they can go as high as $5,000, $6,000 for kind of that initial what's interesting in the playground. So I mean, we're a law firm. We're more expensive. There's a lot of commercial searching firms out there that I think would be, cost effective, but you get what you pay for. I'm just going to leave that with you. Somebody asked me, are there any good examples of landscape analysis that are publicly available on the web? You know, I just saw some really good ones in WIPO recently. WIPO has been doing some really good landscape work, expensive landscape work, but they've been talking about various and sundry things. So I would certainly point you to the WIPO site. Again, landscape is a very broad and, nebulous term. So again, give me a call. We'll talk about more about that going forward. What are good search tools for organic molecule compounds and compositions? Pretty much any of the ones that specialize in that I think are decent on that. So I mean, I don't have a preferred group that we use them all for different purposes, and we tend to compare the results across to see which one we believe more when we're doing it. Can I expand a little bit on my comment about using statistical modeling to show a examiner continuation where continuation is appropriate? Yes, of course. So one of the things about doing continuation practice and using analytics to help you get there is that we are able to actively model what you claimed previously, where you've run into problems with examiner commentary, what references they've cited, and we can start to overlay concepts and keywords. Now, this is one of our proprietary tools, so it's not what we're, not really, it's a human interface thing. But so we can certainly show that statistically, that the words, and graphically, we show the examiner the words are not used by the current references fairly adroitly using one of our tools. So that's really what I meant on that as well. So, so I think I've come to the end of the questions that I've gotten so far. So I'll wait a few more minutes, or if anybody else has more questions to ask. Otherwise, our website is slwip.com. Please look me up. I'm very happy to answer questions this is an area that I'm very passionate about and very interested in sharing my knowledge with. Again, it's not something that's done mechanically. It's not something that is a simple computer thing. Google Patents hasn't figured out how to do it very well either at this point. So, I talk with every one of the commercial vendors out there and tell them what I think. I think it's a very small and interesting marketplace of ideas, but I think the surface has just been scratched as we get to this. So I don't see any more questions coming in, so I will say thank you very much. I appreciate your time. This will be up there. Please fill out the response there. If you'd like to hear more on any one of those 6 kind of analytical points, or come back to patent speed dating, please say so in the reports. And I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.